Hi there, I'm Kim Kautzer from RightShop, and I'd like to welcome you today to Teaching Writing to Your Twice Exceptional Child. I hope that by the end of the session, you'll have some clarity on whether you have a 2E child in your home, and also just to give you some tools to tuck away into your tool belt, some writing strategies, some great ideas, and ways that you can make writing not only more fun, but also more strategic as you teach to the special needs of your 2E child. You may feel like you're teaching the only reluctant writer in the universe, when in truth, most of us have one reluctant writer, and many of us have several. For the reluctant writer, the blank page is their mortal enemy. It blocks their thoughts. It double dog dares them to think of one thing to write and put on their paper. And with the 2E child, the struggle is magnified because they have an exceptional IQ, and yet they're also dealing with a learning disability. They wrestle with everything from basic punctuation and paragraph writing to organizing and coming up with ideas. Writing is just hard. Kyla is a 7th grader who loves math and science. So her understanding and her problem-solving skills are pretty much off the chart. And yet there's a challenge here because every assignment that requires reading and writing is pretty much doomed to failure. She just can't seem to get them done. And then there's Evan. It seems like every school day for Evan's mom ends up with Evan having meltdowns, frustration, tears. He's bright, he's highly motivated, he loves technology, he's a walking encyclopedia on the planet Mars. He can spend hours learning about Mars. So why is it that he can't sit still long enough to write a sentence? I know that for many moms, parents like you have a struggling writer, and you're looking for that one strategy, that one tool that's going to help your child write more than just a few words on a piece of paper. I understand this because I've been there too. We decided to homeschool when our girls were 7 and 10 years old. Our girls were bright, motivated, articulate. They loved to write. They were voracious readers. They were creative. And homeschooling was pretty much a breeze with those two. Our youngest daughter in particular was inclined toward giftedness, but she did not have learning disabilities, and so it wasn't the same as teaching a 2E child. Then our son came along, and even though I didn't know the vocabulary back then, I now can look back and see he is and was a 2E, a twice exceptional child. He was a struggling learner. He was the poster boy for reluctant writers. He was undiagnosed, but we suspect that he had dysgraphia. We also saw signs that we can now think were probably sensory processing disorder. He was prone toward both hypo and hypersensitivity. He had issues holding a pencil, forming letters, writing on a line, just anything having to do with writing, in particular, the physical act of writing, not so much the ideas. He was an auditory and a kinesthetic learner. He knew answers. That wasn't the problem. He just could not translate what was in his head to the paper. Some of you are wondering whether you have a twice exceptional child. And so let's talk about what the characteristics of a 2E child can be. It's always helpful to start out defining and describing. Some of you know for certain, and others of you suspect. So let's take a look at these lists and see if they give you some clarity. As with any comprehensive list, you need to understand that these characteristics are not shared by all 2E children. It can be hard even to decide what would you consider a strength or a weakness, what would you consider an ability or a disability, because it depends on the setting. Oftentimes, whether one is going to fit in one category or another. For example, if your child likes to argue with adults, In a social setting, having a debate with grandpa over some, political issue might be considered admirable. But that same child arguing with his teacher in co-op class, not so much. So you can see that debating quality can be a strength, but it can also play against him and be a weakness. You can't fit all TUI children into the same round hole. You, I'm sure, already know that, but it bears repeating. A list like this can give you some context for identifying and better understanding your own TUI child. So let's kind of jump right in and talk about what we mean by strengths. So intellectual giftedness is an obvious factor. When you have a TUI child, that is by definition one of their major characteristics. They are gifted. So that means that they can express mature thoughts in great detail. They can sound like adults in some ways. They're global and imaginative thinkers with high-level problem-solving skills and advanced ideas and opinions. They also have advanced verbal skills and an incredible vocabulary. And I look back and think about some of the kids that I had in my writing classes or some of my other co-op classes that I taught back in my homeschooling days. And I realized, man, there were some really gifted children who had incredibly strong vocabularies and used their words appropriately and in their writing and in their conversation. Another strength is outside the box creativity. So you'll probably identify that your kids have unusual imaginations, that they can be extremely creative, not only in their approach to tasks, but also creative in the ways that they have learned to compensate for their disabilities. And finally, in this out of the box area, I'm sure you've noticed that the kids can have quirky personalities, quirky senses of humor, and sometimes we understand and can connect with it, and sometimes it's like, whoa, where did that come from? But they can be really fun and really funny. Focused interests is often characteristic of a twice exceptional child. They can have an extraordinary talent in one particular area, such as math or drawing, art, music, verbal communication. They can be precocious in their knowledge about loads of subjects, or they can be so super focused on one particular subject, and that's where their passion is. They can be fully vested in one area. They might demonstrate exceptional knowledge in something like Pokemon or dinosaurs or chess. It just, whatever seems to captivate your child at a given season is typical, because most kids are not that hyper-focused, but our TUI kids can be. And then finally, autodidacticism. This basically means that your kids like to learn independently, and they have an ability to teach themselves successfully. Now, my middle daughter, was not 2E. I mentioned earlier she didn't have learning disabilities, but she really liked to teach herself. And she taught herself calculus in high school. I can't tell you what calculus means, but she had that inclination and that drive to do that on her own. They also will do better with academic flexibility rather than rigidity. So those are the strengths. Let's talk about some of their struggles. Asynchronous development is one thing that 2E children can wrestle with. This means there's a huge gap between their verbal skills and their ability to write. So this can be part of the problem. It can also result in inconsistent academic performance, because they can perform high in some areas and low in others. As a result, they can sometimes lack this academic initiative because they can't do well they appear to be unmotivated, or they'll avoid school tasks, or they'll often fail to complete assignments because of this gap between what they can think about in their head and what they can actually accomplish. And what is inherent to a 2E child, as opposed to just a gifted child, is some sort of learning disability. This can be one, it can be several, it can be emotional or mental, it can be physical. It can be something like maybe they're on the autism spectrum, maybe they demonstrate ADHD, or they have auditory or visual processing disorders, or they may respond slowly to tasks, and it may be small motor. Maybe they can't hold a pencil, like my son. He was always dropping a pencil. He struggled with handwriting or completing pencil and paper activities. This may be something your child is also wrestling with. And then the third thing is they can be distracted easily and be super disorganized. This is not always the case. They might have trouble following directions, let's say, like my son, or have poor organizational skills when it comes to their schoolwork or their studies. But yet they can also be very organized in other areas, like Ben. He kept his room neat. He was organized in the way he played. He lined things up. Things had their special arrangement. So distractibility, disorganization often will play into their schooling, not so much into their daily, other activities, but it can. And they can be unable to maintain focus for long periods of time. So their attention span is kind of wandering. Their head is filled with so many ideas. This is one of the reasons that writing can be hard for them, because their stories take tangents and rabbit trails. So when they're writing, it just becomes longer and longer and longer, and they don't know where to stop or how to stop, and they get tired. Or they just have trouble sticking to a theme or to a point, and their writing is just a jumble. You also may see perfectionism in your 2E child. They're just afraid to risk making mistakes. They hate the idea of being wrong. They're afraid of judgment. They're afraid you're going to disapprove. And they can easily give up on their tasks and just say, I can't do this right or perfectly, so therefore I'm not going to do it at all. And also your children will just struggle to finish tasks within a deadline. If they are perfectionists, they feel this need, this obligation to themselves, superimposed or self-imposed, not something that even you have put on them. But they feel like if I can't do it right the first time, it's not worth doing, and therefore they take so much time to do it that they can't finish in a timely manner. Despite their advanced vocabulary, they might struggle to express themselves verbally or have difficulty communicating an idea, explaining something that they're trying to get across, and they often will just have trouble getting to the point. So those are characteristics. Now let's talk about some teaching strategies for your twice exceptional writers. So we're going to focus on writing. And as a parent, you're going to want to understand their needs and, of course, make a plan so that you can come into this with a bit more, feeling more equipped, let's just say. So what does the twice exceptional writer need? They may be smart, but it doesn't mean that they can succeed all on their own. They may need many things, but here are a few overarching ones. Number one, they need parent involvement. They can't be left to their own devices. They need you to be present, to supervise, to oversee, to give input. Even if they're independent workers like my daughter, I still was her teacher, and I needed to make sure she was on track. Your kids also need to be challenged in new ways. These kids are bright, and they often will just need, as a writer, to have new ideas and new ways to write. So we'll explore some of those in a bit. And then they need opportunities to explore their gifts. Again, something that I'm going to touch on a little bit more as we go through the session. So how can you as a parent help your child? One is to teach to their strengths. The most encouraging environment for a 2E child is one in which their giftedness is recognized and their disability is minimized. You want to look for their the things that they're strong in and really bless that and encourage that. When you cater to your child's strengths, it engages his interests, it makes him more involved in the process, gives him more motivation to do the project, and also reduces frustration. The second thing here is to give your kids opportunities for higher level thinking and creativity and more problem solving. So letting your kids use their preferred learning style is going to result in more meaningful learning. So if they're visual, let them use their eyes to learn. If they're auditory, help them do things that appeal to their hearing. And kinesthetic learners can learn through movement, and tactile learners through the sense of touch. So giving them different ways that they can learn and tailoring it to their particular need. The third thing is to consider their emotional needs. One 2E teacher put it this way: the most important thing you can do has nothing to do with methods and materials. It has everything to do with emotional connection. So as much as possible, try to get inside your 2E's head. This may mean thinking about, well, can we play a game? Can I relate to her in a more playful way, something that's going to be a little less threatening? Finding a way that gets around the struggle and gets to the heart of the activity that's more meaningful. What a blessing you can be to your child when she realizes that your only desire is to understand her better and to appreciate her giftedness. And finally, under their emotional needs, is to just remember that comparing is not going to get you anywhere. Don't compare your child to your sister's kids. Don't compare your child to siblings or friends, but evaluate her according to her own abilities. And then 4, nurture and appreciate your kids' intense imagination. Let them ask the incessant questions that they've got this overexcitability, this intellectual overexcitability. And so they'll have questions. It may interfere with your learning, but if possible, if you can set the math aside for just a minute, listen to their ideas for a new invention or whatever, even make some notes for them so they can do a brain dump, get it out of their mind, you put it on paper, and you can say, okay, you've given me your ideas. I'm going to set this aside so that you can plan your invention later, but now we can get back to fractions. 5th is to be realistic. Not every writing project is going to be a success. They will struggle sometimes, there will be tears, it's all okay. Sometimes, even for a child who's not gifted or who doesn't have a learning disability, will not be successful with every project. So if you can be good with that, it will help your kids. Now, some writing strategies. What are some actual things you can do in the writing area that will help your kids feel successful? One is to break assignments into sections. Help them see that the part rather than the whole can be accomplished. If you just throw out at them that they have an essay due next week or that they have a book report due this Friday, what do they see? They see this big project instead of seeing all the little steps that make the project happen. So it's better to say the steps you're going to take to complete this include brainstorming, writing a rough draft, doing a little bit of self-editing and revising, letting me take a look at it and giving some input, and then writing a final draft. If they realize that there are steps to take along the way, they will feel more successful. And identify success as they complete each of those steps by rewarding them in some way for completing even what seems like an inconsequential or small step. It helps sometimes to give them a poster or a visual chart that identifies the steps, and even to break it down by day of the week with a calendar, whatever seems to work best to motivate your particular child. Number 2 is to give them explicit instructions on how to organize. See, with these kids, their abstract thinking is challenged, and so you want to incorporate visual cues and graphic organizers that can help them see what it is that they need to do. So a graphic organizer is just basically a chart, a grid, a mind map, a bubble organizer, something that helps them take the pieces of their writing project, the ideas that they have, and put them into some kind of order. Another thing is to allow choices in topics for their written work. Let them explore topics that are inherently interesting to them. Look for topics where they excel and that nurtures their strengths and their interests. It's going to make writing more productive for them. It's going to make writing more fun. You may get tired of hearing about this subject over and over again, whether it's horses or whether it's skateboards or whether it's some video activity. But if it engages them and they're excited about it, they're going to be more likely to write. Fourth is to encourage self-regulation, such as proofreading and making their own corrections. Now, understand that this is something that's going to come with age. When you have a really young child, they are not going to be good at self-correcting. When you have a teenager who's never done this before, they're not going to be good at self-editing or proofreading. So it may mean that you need to come alongside them in the beginning and walk them through it. Provide them a checklist, because then they've got something they can look at and compare to their paper. Did I do this? Check. Did I do that? Check. Did I do that? Oops, fix. Then check. And so you give them a checklist that's very helpful for them and that you can come back to and review with them, or when you're first teaching them, go through it together. And then acknowledge and reward, not just the end product, but the process as well. Catch them doing something right. Don't always focus on the mistakes. It's so easy for us to see those glaring errors, and especially if we've had a rough day and we're already feeling a bit frazzled and fragile, so we can go off at the slightest thing. But try to avoid making a big deal out of their small mistakes and to focus on their successes. And finally, help them adapt. Teach to their giftedness, but help them learn how to accommodate their learning disabilities. One is to make writing adjustments. It could be allowing extra time to complete an assignment. It could be breaking up an assignment into periods so they can work for 15 minutes. You can do anything in 15 minutes. I've learned this. Take a break and then come back and do it again. Letting your kids dictate to you. Oh, if I could give you any tip to take home, this would be my #1 strategy. Let your kids speak their ideas out. Let them walk around the room and talk. Let them feel free to come up with ideas without the limitations of having to do the writing all by themselves. For some kids, this is a game changer, like it was for my Ben. He was loaded with ideas, but those ideas would translate into 2 words on a piece of paper because he didn't have the wherewithal to get the ideas out of his head, down his arm, worrying about spelling, worrying about punctuation, and then the idea would vanish. So let your kids dictate to you and you can be their scribe. Another way to help them adapt is to, and kind of along the lines of letting them dictate, is to provide them with speech-to-text software, or let them type instead of writing by hand. For many kids, this is a second step. Maybe you start out in the beginning with dictation. Dictation is important because you can guide their thinking and guide their organization and help them to think through the process so that when you're writing it down, it's not going to be disjointed. When they're just speaking into a microphone on their own, their ideas can be all over the place. So that might be better for them as they've gotten more skilled at speaking their ideas out. Integrate technology. Maybe you have a laptop that you can preload with software that like voice recognition, word prediction, brainstorming software, spell checker. And then another idea is assistive technologies like smart pens or note-taking apps. Just anything that you know will help your child adapt. Even pencil grips, special pencil grips might be useful for kids. And you can find those all over the place just by searching for them. For some kids, they can adapt by using movement. So finding ways to incorporate movement into the lesson, whether it's through a hands-on activity, letting them stand, letting them chew gum, giving them stress balls or quiet manipulatives. For my son, that was critical to keeping him focused without that hand just kind of moving away and grabbing something and banging it while we're trying to study. So giving them just those ways to keep their hands occupied in a quiet manner. Another way to help them adapt to their special needs is to let them work wherever they want. The only thing is, give them 3 simple rules to follow. Don't bother anyone, including mom. Don't call attention to yourself, and do the work you're supposed to do. I mentioned briefly about taking breaks when working on a new writing concept, but this can be expanded when you think about like, okay, how do I know when to take a break? If you're not just working in 15-minute increments, you might just watch for visual cues like, oh, he's getting stressed, he's getting frustrated. You want to stop this before the meltdown comes. You don't want to wait until that moment of frustration has come, the tears start, the meltdowns, the paper gets wadded up and thrown away. You've lost them at that point. It's too late to come back. You need to set it aside and pick it up again several hours later or the next day. But if you can identify those points of stress or frustration before the meltdown, then you're yards ahead. So let them take a break to have a drink, to go to the bathroom, to get a snack, to go outside and run around, get some of that wiggles out. But not acknowledging this can lead to mental exhaustion and the tantrums, and you know. All right, so let's talk about writing activities that you can tailor to their learning styles. So again, I mentioned earlier about the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and logical learners. And so we're going to just look at a few things that you can do because you want to tailor the writing activity to the way that they learn best. If they're visual learners, they're obviously going to gravitate towards things that include pictures or color or vivid images. Even if they're verbal, they have a visual picture to them. So writing projects can include mobiles, cartoons, descriptions of people or settings. They can create a magazine with text and images. They can make a diagram that they label. They can have invent a board game and write the rules, do photo essays, just anything that speaks to their preference for the visual. For an auditory or verbal child, you're going to look for things that let them listen, that let them explain or talk, or maybe give a presentation of some kind. So now you're looking at things like advertisements, book reviews, poetry, writing a radio show, doing a presentation that accompanies an oral report, writing or acting out a fairy tale or a folk tale, doing dramatic readings, doing skits, anything that where they can write about it and then present it in an auditory or verbal way, or learning something, headphones and listening. Those are also ways that you can incorporate, but those will be the input part, and you're also wanting to look for ways to do output with their writing project. So those are the things that I just mentioned. With the kinesthetic and tactile child, the more hands-on, the better. So when you're teaching writing skills, Writing games that use manipulatives and that don't require extra writing can be really successful for them. A skit or a drama, those get them engaged physically. Building something, whether it's making a junk sculpture out of odds and ends that you have around the house, or building a Lego, a sculpture, or a Lego, like a house or whatever they want to build with Legos, a vehicle, and then writing a description of that, that creation. They can also do experiments, whether it's a science experiment or they want to do a cooking experiment. Have them mess around with things and then write an explanation of the process or the results. And then fourth, we have our logical child. Now, this kiddo loves to reason, loves to argue, loves to use logic and numbers to figure things out. Why does something work? Why did that happen? And so when you're doing writing activities with them, let them write riddles, have them do something that has cause and effect, where they experiment and then they write about it. If I do this, then this happens. How can I write about that? Stories that have a problem and a solution. If they can learn what it means to write a problem solution story, whether it's a mystery or science fiction story, it just appeals to the way that they like to learn, because it's logical. And then they come up with a satisfactory conclusion. So they have the problem, they think of several different ways maybe that problem could be solved, or if it's a mystery, several ways, clues, or things that they could follow that could lead to the solving of the mystery. And then in the end, they have a satisfactory conclusion. These kids also will do better if they can use the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, why, because it's logical. It makes sense. It has an order. So even though the 5 W's are great for all kinds of writers, they're especially good for your logical writer. And then as they get older and they're ready to tackle persuasive and argumentative writing, this will appeal to them probably more than creative writing will. Your logical child is not likely going to be a creative writer, and so the most creative writing will probably be those problem and solution stories that they would enjoy doing. What do I mean when I say higher level thinking? Because we're going to talk about tailoring writing to this higher level to thinking. So higher level thinking basically means it's questions and tasks that encourage a child to think beyond literal questions. It's going to promote their critical thinking skills. You're going to ask them to apply, to analyze, to evaluate information, anything beyond just the facts, ma'am. Anything beyond spitting out and regurgitating just details. This is going to make them think more deeply. So what do I mean about apply? This is where they take what they've been learning and apply it to a new situation. Instead of writing a simple report, they can turn it into a diary entry. So a report about Benjamin Franklin can become a diary entry written by Benjamin Franklin. Making a PowerPoint presentation is a way that they can apply knowledge to a new format. They can write an explanation about a topic. Analyzing. So in analyzing, they can identify the elements of a story, the setting, the plot, the characters. They can compare and contrast because they have to think analytically to do that. And they can write a biography about a person that they're studying. Evaluating means to justify a stand or a decision. Kids who are beginning to learn to evaluate can justify a position that they want to take when they're writing a persuasive article. They might write an editorial. They might recommend a book. And then to create is to use what they know to create something brand new, a new original work. So it may be a play or a TV show that they write, or predicting a new ending to a familiar story, or creating a new product and then explaining how to sell it. So again, thinking about higher level skills that challenge their creativity and their thinking beyond just the very basic facts and knowledge. We want to take them beyond simple comprehension. This is not true, false. This is not multiple choice. This is taking them to a different level of thinking. We can also tailor writing to their specific interests. We mentioned this earlier, but whether it's sports, video games, animals, whether it's science and technology. I have a granddaughter who's super into robotics, and anything that she can do in her schoolwork that has to do with robotics is right up her alley. Now, I've mentioned creative writing, but there are lots of ways that you can do creative writing with your 2E child. Creative writing is not always going to be, you know, fanciful stories, but it can be. We're just going to start there. Your 2E children can show incredible creativity, and we need to challenge that. So we can build on their strengths by giving them activities that bring out their creative side. We're going to talk about writing activities that engage their analytical minds, but that also touch on their imaginative talents. It's good to try to choose writing activities that involve higher level thinking skills that I mentioned earlier: analysis, interpretation, evaluation. And so let's explore some specific activities now that can inspire your 2E kids. We'll start at the beginning, which is brainstorming. Brainstorming should always happen before they begin to do the writing. Brainstorming gives them a leg up, because if you just give them a blank piece of paper, you may as well throw them in the ocean and tell them to swim for shore. They don't know which way shore is, how far they have to go, nothing. But brainstorming gives them boundaries. So you want to help them to be able to organize and plan, think of ideas, see what sticks, and then begin to organize them for their writing. Remember that your 2E child is often going to see things differently. He's going to crave choices and options. Your child needs to be stretched, needs to be challenged. And so something like a time machine helps them to take what might be a normal, ordinary writing assignment, but to place it somewhere in the future, maybe 10 or 15 years in the future, or 100 years, or 1,000 years in the future, or do the same thing but put it in a past setting. To switch up the actual setting and not just the time, ask them, okay, so how could you make this more fun for you to write about by putting it in a different location, different part of the world, a different country, a different geographic region? So instead of setting it in the desert, could you set it in the mountains? Could you set it in Antarctica? What would be a place that would make this story more interesting and unique? The third one is role reversal. How would you write the story if you were someone or something else? How would you write the story from the point of view of your brother or a pet or your toothbrush? Could you do that? Your gifted child can begin to tell the basics of a story in the brainstorming stages, and then she can discover that telling the story through different eyes can create a unique focus. And then the fourth idea is super me. What if your main character had superpowers? What if your main character could see through walls, or could stretch like elastic, or whatever? You know, you have Wonder Woman and Superman and all these different superheroes that they can model after, and they can figure out a way to make their story much more engaging. So here's another idea for story writing, and this is to write a remix. This is different from brainstorming because you're not starting from scratch. Instead, you take a story, you're going to alter it from its original state by adding or removing elements and changing pieces of the original. So for instance, they could transform a personal narrative into a Greek myth, or they could rewrite a story as a mystery. Star Wars is a good example. Star Wars is basically a Western in a futuristic outer space setting. The Lion King is Hamlet written as an animal fable. So even if they can understand how those things can work, it might give them some ideas. So to start, help them choose a fairy tale or a story that they're already familiar with, and to remix at least 3 elements, whether they change up the time, the place, the genre of the story, the character's species or gender, the beginning of the story, or the middle or the end, or all 3, changing some elements of what happened to make it more interesting or just different. Changing the point of view, writing from first person instead of third, just all different ways that a child can remix the story. And then they can do things with it. They can build they've got their basics of their story. They can write it as like if they have iMovie, they can make a movie, and you can find common, Creative Commons photos, images online that they can use that are free for the use. Just make sure you're not using copyrighted images when you're doing something like this. They can make a claymation movie. They can create an illustrated book for their siblings. There's a website called barebooks.com, B-A-R-E books.com, and you can get hardback blank books, lined, unlined, and then the kids can write their own books. They can illustrate them. They can write. So it's a great way to create a gift for a sibling. They can build a web page. They can write a blog. There are just lots of ways that you can incorporate different kinds of writing when they're doing their remix. Also, with your kids, you want to make sure you're incorporating real-world writing somewhere in your homeschooling. Kids often want to know, the gifted children want to know that there's a reason you're asking them to do a certain writing assignment. So here are some ways to help them feel like things are more practical and more meaningful for them, whether they're writing about a community concern like loose dogs or garbage in a city setting, and then they just want to write about it. They can write a letter to the editor, or put maybe if it's something that they can put in a church bulletin, or just a plea to help with a cause, or to choose for the homeless, or a food pantry. It's just looking for ways that they can take something that they think is an important subject that is valuable to them and important to them, and then they can find ways to communicate about it in writing. Another thing that's a real-world writing exercise is to take a stand on something, to research a topic, to write bullet points about it, where you take your stand, you support it with evidence, and you have recommended solutions just in some simple bullet points, and then it can be expanded into an essay or even a report. So whether it's video games or global warming, or the advantages and disadvantages of giving technology to children, just these are some ways that they can learn to take a stand. List making is another idea. They can create 10 things lists that let them demonstrate their knowledge or their expertise, and then they can turn these lists into a graph or into a PowerPoint explaining why. So each page of the PowerPoint can have one item from the list. It can have an illustration. Maybe it's just going to be 2 sentences for each page that they expand their list just a little bit. Or maybe they want to make a little booklet, 10 things to do in my town, or just writing out a book of lists, 10 things to know about Minecraft, 10 things to know about soccer, 10 things to know about my family. Just list making is a way of writing. Writing doesn't always have to be a major undertaking, a story, a report, or a term paper. Making an instruction manual is a fun way to provide real-world writing. So take pictures of them as they are engaged in a process of making something, creating something, inventing something, doing a chore, mowing the lawn. And then you can print out the pictures, and they can make like a storyboard, and with Post-it notes or index cards, they can write about what's happening in each of those pictures, and then turn those into instructions so that every page has a picture and an instruction, a part of the process, so that in the end they've got this instruction manual that they have created. So whether it's how to code, or how to beat a video game level, or whatever their interest is, they can do something like this. Writing across the curriculum is a great way to stretch the twice exceptional child. Gifted kids often learn better when the subject matter is expanded for wider and deeper learning. I'm going to have a slide at the end that has a link to a download on our website where you can get these ideas and many, many, many more. So I'm not going to spend tons of time on this, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of little things just to give you an idea of what it means to write across the curriculum. This is where project-based learning is so effective, because they can zoom in on robotics or art or ancient Egypt, whatever they happen to love, and it gives the opportunity for real, authentic learning. So with project-based writing, the focus is on the project, and writing is just a part of that. The kids are going to be motivated and energized by their strengths, their interests, and their talents. And your TUI learners can compensate for their weaknesses by engaging in authentic and purposeful learning. Writing across the curriculum is loaded with learning and teaching opportunities in many ways that your kids can learn to express themselves. It involves real-life learning across many disciplines, from history and geography to nature studies, literature, art, music, research, observation, science. I mean, there's just so many ways that you can involve your kids in real-life learning. And this is how I homeschooled, basically, through unit studies where we immersed ourselves in a subject for sometimes months. And as we studied a certain aspect of that, then the kids could go deep on something that they were really interested in. So you're encouraging immersion, and they can really go deep in something that has interest for them. So we may all be studying about life in New England, in historical New England, and yet one of the kids may focus on learning more about making maple syrup, another may want to learn more about whaling. Those are all part of what it meant in New England days, and yet one child might not care a whit about whaling, but would really love to study more about something else. Your kids can express themselves in writing in lots of different ways. Again, don't think it has to be a story, it has to be a book report, it has to be a research report, it has to be an essay. They can write creatively, informatively, they can write narratives, they can do persuasive writing in their essays, they can compare, contrast, they can write poems, they can label and diagram and make lists. It doesn't have to be a full-blown paragraph to demonstrate their understanding. They can journal. There are lots of different ways to do journaling. They can do nature journaling, field trip journaling, historical journaling where they write diaries, like I mentioned earlier, and they can give oral presentations as an extension of their writing. It's one more way to express themselves. Writing across the curriculum is just plain fun. There's a time and a place for reports, but it's not always the best measurement of the way your kids learn, especially with a 2E child. Kids are going to be a lot more willing to write, less resistant, if they know that they can do something like write an advertisement or create a board game or make a brochure or make a map. And then they can see that when they're learning about Lewis and Clark or Pompeii, there are more creative ways that they can express their learning. It also will inspire your kids to write across the curriculum if they're bored with other kinds of writing or they're tired of the same old assignments. Special projects like these allow them to explore a subject in more depth without having to prove their knowledge in the traditional way, which we often consider just to be a report. Not all students are gifted writers. It doesn't mean they don't understand the subject. This was clear with Ben. He was not a good writer, but he was very, very knowledgeable about many things, and we had to tap into the ways that he could express that knowledge. Writing across the curriculum is going to ignite kids who are intensely passionate about a subject, whether it's bugs or Lord of the Rings or Civil War or bowling. I mean, you know, your kid has a passion, has an interest. What is that? What can stimulate them? So the projects are going to make a great hands-on way to study these topics of special interest. It can appeal to their different learning styles. It can let them immerse themselves in a topic they're crazy about. It can call on their unique skills and talents to create the project, and it can incorporate writing without writing having to be dominating. This is one area, moms and dads, where you can level the playing field. So it gives all students a chance to express themselves through writing and to even excel without compositions having to be the strong suit. Offer choices when possible. In my history classes, I used to give kids options for longer projects. So I'd let them alternate between a traditional report and a project, but I would let them do maybe some non-traditional reports. And what that means is giving them something that they could do, like learn how to make paper and then figure out how was paper made and used in ancient Egypt. I'm making it, and then I'm going to write a short report explaining it. Just allowing reports to take other forms sometimes. This is going to allow your kids to demonstrate their knowledge through making a crossword puzzle where they have to know things to write the clues and know the answers to write the puzzle itself. Just Google for free crossword puzzle generators, and then you can set your kids loose to fill in the clues and the answers. They can make a map with a written explanation about the journey that a particular historical character took along the route, what they learned, what happened at each stop. And so they make the map to express themselves creatively, and then they can write a brief explanation. Just lots of different ways that you can incorporate writing across the curriculum with your kids. Poetry across the curriculum is also really fun. They can do haiku summaries. So if you've ever done haiku poems, you know that they have 3 lines, and each line has a certain number of syllables. So the first line is 5 syllables, the second line is 7 syllables, and the third line again is 5. So how can you use haiku poetry when you're writing across the curriculum? Well, here's an example for science. Let's say you're studying about photosynthesis. Here you have a 3-line poem about photosynthesis. Chlorophyll converts, 5 syllables. Carbon dioxide into 7 syllables. Oxygen we breathe, 5 syllables. So it's basically a definition of photosynthesis written as a haiku poem. You can do this in lots of different ways. They can summarize chapters. They can write current events or biographies or vocabulary words, all done in a haiku fashion. And haiku poems are kid-friendly, and yet they force your children to be concise and purposeful with their word choice. So this really is a higher level thinking activity. Science free verse is another great way that you can do this. They're basically writing a sentence that's factual, and then they're going to edit the sentence to incorporate poetic devices. So alliteration, repetition, similes and metaphors. So instead of saying something like, you know, whales are in the water and they move through the water and they're kind of silent, and the child's rambling and trying to tell you all this. Instead, they can just say, whales whisper to each other as they weave through the salty water. So you have taken something, or whales make waves, and using those poetic devices. So they're taking something scientific and turning it into a poem. Writing about books is a great way to engage your kids. They can blog about, they can do a book review, let's say on a blog. They can rate a book series. They can create a vocabulary game or a book jacket, or make a character interview one of their characters from a favorite book, make a most wanted poster, or write make a storyboard. I mean, just writing about books. There's so many creative ways that you can do this. You can Google for creative book reports, and that will just right away get you going in the right direction. Writing historical fiction is a way to get your kids who love history to focus in on something where they're going to choose a historical era, and then they're going to think of a character. They're going to put a character into this historical, it'll be a fictional character that they place into a real life time. They can spend time studying. The kids, they love to go deep. And so they can create a personal history for this character. They can make a map or a setting for feudal Japan or the American prairie or wherever the story is taking place. And then they can begin to develop a concrete idea of where this person lives. So they can start to paint the setting. So this will appeal to your visual learners, colorful descriptive words and phrases, the landforms, the mountains, the terrain, the water features, and then place your character there. And what does it feel like to your character to stand on this ground? Is it rocky? Is it spongy? Is it stony? Is it sandy? And then they begin to write the narrative. While they do so, they place the character into this historical setting with real life details that make it a lot more interesting. Journaling outside the box is a great way to engage your kids. You can Google for art journaling or go on Pinterest and look for art journaling ideas for kids. This is amazing for your kids who have artistic inclinations, whether they like to draw or paint or use mixed media. They can combine words, poems, observations. It can be a nature-focused, it can be just art-focused, but they're journaling their memories, their ideas, their thoughts, and incorporating art. Photo journaling does something very similar, except they're using photographs. And then they can create a writer's notebook, which is just a way for them to assemble lists of words that they love, or ideas that they come across, or brainstorming about a certain topic. They just fill a page with everything they can think about the beach, or everything that comes to mind when they think about grandma or chocolate. And then when they're ready to write, they can refer to this, and they've got all these ideas in their writer's notebook, their impressions, their thoughts, and the things that they've observed. So I've given you lots of different ideas. As I said, I'm going to give you in just a minute a link that'll give you a place to download many of the things that I've talked about, plus lots more that I didn't have time to cover. Your twice exceptional child is a gift to you. It can be exhilarating and exhausting all at the same time. It can be overwhelming. You can feel like you're drowning sometimes. And there are other days where you just go, what a wonderful gift you are to me. It's hard to keep up with them sometimes. It's hard to challenge them. They are so bright and so advanced. And it can be struggling to think, how can I teach this child? I don't even feel equipped. And sometimes it's easy for us to forget that our child is only 10. Our child is only 6. Our child is only 13. Because we hear and see such advanced stuff coming out of them that we want to force them ahead too fast. So let me encourage you to let them remain a child. Let them be their age. Challenge them, yes, but don't push them so far ahead that they lose their childhood. Enjoy them, enjoy watching them unfold into the person that they've been created to be. I'm just going to quickly take you through an overview of RightShop, because some of you are going to be coming away from this thinking, it's all good and well to do all these fun writing things, but how do I get my child to write a sentence? How do we start with just basic paragraphs? And you may need a writing curriculum. If so, you can take a look at RightShop. We have materials for grades K through 3. They are wonderful for children who have special needs or who need some hand-holding. They're great for kids of all kinds of learning styles. But if you have a child who struggles in a particular area, RightShop can be great for you. So RightShop Primary is no pressure. You don't have to have a reader or a writer at all, because everything can be done orally. And with RightShop primary and RightShop Junior, there's a lot of multisensory and hands-on activities that may appeal to your child, both reluctant and eager learners. In RightShop Junior, we're going to introduce genre, graphic organizers, writing games and activities. They're going to start to dabble in self-editing, and they'll have lots of different kinds of writing that they do that's engaging and fun, and the kids just love it. And again, they don't have to be strong writers to be able to use the program. RightShop 1 and 2 is for teens, and it starts them with basic paragraph writing, and yet I've used this program with reluctant writers and advanced and motivated writers as well. So just know that this is a place you can jump in with giving them some framework for writing with editing checklists, strong word choice, learning how to write more mature sentences, to use different kinds of writing in both descriptive, informative, narrative, and essay writing. You also may still be at a point where you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm just drowning, I'm overwhelmed, and I need some help. I need help choosing a curriculum. I need help choosing a starting level. I need help knowing what I can do to make writing easier for me and my child at home. If so, give us a holler. You can call us, you can email us, and we'll be happy to come alongside you and help you as much as we can to feel successful as you try to teach your 2E child or any of your children to write. Thanks again for being part of this session. I'm so glad that you could be here, and I just ask, just connect with us if you need to, and have a great rest of your day.